world stage is constantly shifting, with events unfolding at a rapid pace. Today, we're diving into a critical area: how NATO is positioning itself against the perceived threats from Russia and China. This has been a topic of debate for a considerable period, and the ambitions of both nations are no secret. They both aspire to accelerate their economic growth, particularly in the Baltic and Arctic regions. Furthermore, they aim to establish an autocratic power structure that extends over the globe, encompassing both the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. It's precisely at this juncture that NATO's attention is laser-focused on the Baltic and Scandinavian territories, areas that both Russia and China view as their primary arena of influence. The international military alliance is determined to impede the developing partnership between Moscow and Beijing, especially in the Nordic area. The recent integration of Finland and Sweden into NATO was a direct response, designed to counteract these critical risk elements. However, NATO's strategy needed further enhancement. Therefore, the focus of its member states has transitioned fully to the Nordic region. The Nordic alliance members have expressed deep concerns about Russia and China's increasing access to vital natural resources in the region. The Nordic group, spearheaded by 4 countries, has heavily emphasized NATO's capability to deter aggression by setting up a joint air defense system that is aimed directly at Russia and China. These countries are Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. Rather than acting independently within their own airspaces, they plan to operate as a single, unified military force, collectively responsible for the security of a zone the size of Brazil. Finland is leading this initiative with its powerful military, including the transition from FA-18 Hornets to F-35As. Meanwhile, Norway is contributing F-35 jets, along with advanced radar technology. Denmark is in the process of upgrading its fleet with F-35As, and Sweden is strengthening its locally built JAS Gripen fleet. This vast air power serves as a blueprint for regional security cooperation within NATO and the Arctic. Now let's explore in detail just how this Nordic group can utilize this combined air power to counter Russia and China, as well as examine how many aircraft the alliance has, and what effect this joint power will have on the Moscow-Beijing alignment. But before we dive deeper, let me ask you to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and hit that like button. This support is invaluable to our work. We appreciate your engagement, so be sure to comment where you're tuning in from. Your feedback and engagement are incredibly important for the growth of our community, and it keeps the content rolling. After this section, include a brief statement as requested below. The joint Nordic Air Command has transformed the air forces of Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark into one cohesive fighting force, aimed at fortifying Northern Europe's defenses against resurgent Russian threats. This strategy, based on the shared and flexible positioning of over 250 aircraft, places significant emphasis on intelligence sharing and unified command structures. Let's now examine the specific contributions of each air force. First, we look at Finland. The Finnish Air Force operates FA-18C Hornets, which it will keep active until the US completes the transfer of 64 F-35A fighter jets. This significant purchase order reflects Helsinki's pressing need to address the immediate threat posed by Moscow, as Finland shares the longest border with Russia amongst all NATO members. Among the 4 Nordic nations, Finland is notably the best prepared for potential conflict, boasting the largest conscript reserve army on the continent, one of Europe's biggest artillery stockpiles, and upgraded air defenses. The Finnish Air Force is undeniably the cornerstone of the Nordic Air Command. Next, we move on to Sweden, the most recent addition to NATO after Finland. Sweden exerts great influence as one of the most critical participants in the joint Nordic force. Distinct from American-made aircraft, Sweden manufactures its Gripen C and D variants domestically. The J-39E is now the main fighter jet of the Swedish Air Force, while Finland, Norway, and Denmark have fully adopted the F-35. Sweden remains unique in this regard, as it has chosen to further invest in and advance the capabilities of the JS Gripen. They plan to expand its flag system 2000 in the coming decade. Despite differences in aircraft, the Gripen performs just as competently as any American model. Similar to Lockheed Martin, Saab has grown its customer base via continuous technological advancements. Stockholm could function as the Steve Jobs of the Joint Command Center. Then there's Norway. It's evident just how much of a deterrent NATO has become in the Nordic region. The Royal Norwegian Air Force currently has 34 F-35s combat-ready. 6 additional F-35s are used to train new pilots and for maintenance and logistical needs. Norway has also built its own joint air operations hub in Sisa to give greater support to all airfields and ensure mission success. By integrating cutting-edge systems such as the P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft and multiple F-35 Lightning IIs, the Oslo government has completely modernized its air force, ready to react to any crisis. Norway, with its TP-4 radar system, is recognized as NATO's eyes in the north, especially against the backdrop of Russian aggression. Oslo is reassessing its military capabilities, acknowledging that Putin's ambitions might not be confined to Ukraine. Because of this, Norway's future contributions to NATO's air force are expected to be consistent. After Norway, we immediately shift our attention to Denmark. The Royal Danish Air Force, a critical component of the joint Nordic Air Force, operates 30 F-16AMs. Denmark also has 8 F-35A jets in its arsenal and is awaiting delivery of 13 more of these aircraft. Despite having a population of just 5.9 million, Denmark has become a critical NATO ally due to its high per capita income. The Copenhagen government plans to allocate a considerable proportion of this revenue towards military expenditure, significantly strengthening the future joint Nordic Air Force. The joint power will become considerably more effective and formidable within a few years. These 4 nations will soon constitute an amazing air shield to protect the Baltics from the Russian threat. As early as 2024, before the year's end, the Nordic powers signaled this capability. Finland, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden conducted the first significant test of their joint command as part of Exercise Nordic Response 2024. This exercise, which occurred in northern Norway, emphasized air superiority through joint command and control, supported by naval units. Nordic Response was a notable success, and the Joint Air Command has expanded its operational range in the Arctic, where China and Russia are increasingly seeking to expand their influence. With the inclusion of China in this equation, the collaboration between Finland, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden is becoming more crucial to NATO and Northern Europe. In a world of continuous change and conflict, the Nordic nations are proving that it's essential to be prepared for war while also maintaining diplomatic measures to secure peace. As long as the joint Nordic Air Command, seen as a structure for worldwide stability in the Baltics and the Northern Arctic, remains intact, Russia and China's goal will not materialize. So when did this entity, the Joint Nordic Force, first begin? And what is the history of this union? In the early 1990s, members of the region considered the idea of a joint Nordic Air Force, even though Finland and Sweden were neutral countries at the time. However, both Helsinki and Stockholm had close ties with NATO members and had built capable defense industries. Today, with Finland and Sweden's membership in NATO, integration has become easier. This allowed the Joint Air Force to further develop its basis. On March 16, 2023, the commanders of the Finnish, Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish Air Forces signed a declaration, officially creating the Joint Nordic Air Command, aimed at deepening cooperation between their respective air forces. The creation of the Joint Nordic Air Command has fortified defense measures in Helsinki, Stockholm, Oslo, Copenhagen, and all of Northern Europe against renewed imperial threats from Russia. Progress continues as NATO's European members establish smaller coalitions within the organization to expand regional responsibility and build solid defensive positions within the collective defense alliance. With Norway and Denmark in the group, intelligence sharing can be more frequent and effective. The key goal of the Nordic command structure is to provide flexible air deployment in multiple countries, advance air exercises for officers, and create a stronger command and control network. While NATO is focusing on building a joint air force, the threats posed by Russia and China in the region are far from over. Both countries are increasingly turning to the Arctic in an effort to further pacify NATO and remove Scandinavia from the equation. Increased Russian-Chinese cooperation in the Arctic was highlighted in July 2024, with a significant naval exercise including 9 Russian and Chinese naval vessels conducting joint patrols in the Pacific Northwest. In another unprecedented event that month, 2 Russian bombers and 2 Chinese bombers flew into Alaska's Air Defense Identification Zone and were intercepted by US and Canadian fighter jets. Some analysts have argued that this Russian-Chinese cooperation is still limited within the Arctic, driven primarily by pragmatism and financial interests. However, these views of Arctic exceptionalism overlook the growing geopolitical competition, driven largely by Russia's dominance over the Arctic compared to NATO. The transformation of the Arctic into a strategic battlefield was explicitly recognized in June 2024 through the U.S. Department of Defense's Arctic Strategy, which highlighted the growing cooperation between Russia and China. This was because Russia continued to expand its military presence and activities in the Arctic. The specific environment of the Arctic requires specialized training and equipment, which presents challenges for the United States to maintain military forces in the region. This task was complicated by the U.S. strategic focus on countering China in the Indo-Pacific. NATO represented a means of burden sharing in the Arctic and allowed the U.S. to concentrate efforts elsewhere. Despite the Trump administration's rhetoric to the contrary as it returns to Asia, maintaining strong NATO ties is vital. Since 2019, NATO has tied its strategic survival to the Indo-Pacific axis, and the Trump administration will need to rely more on Arctic-based military to counter Russian and Chinese ambitions. The U.S. military has minimal forces to operate in the Arctic, but it also needs to protect its space-based infrastructure in the area. The United States can ensure a stable Arctic presence and maintain a strong military posture in the Indo-Pacific, particularly by utilizing the Arctic skills of its British, Canadian, and Scandinavian allies. As the only area in the world where Russia and China operate in close proximity to North America, U.S. cooperation with the Nordic group is critical for the dynamics of the region. The melting sea ice and technological advancements have increased accessibility, transforming the Arctic from a strategic buffer into a focal point for valuable resources like oil, gas, rare earth minerals, and new fishing grounds. It has opened up shorter sea routes between Europe and Asia. This increased accessibility has unlocked massive economic potential, including an estimated 90 billion barrels of untapped oil, 30% of the world's undiscovered natural gas, and $1 trillion in rare earth minerals. Russia and China also acknowledge this huge wealth. The opportunities these two nations see bring about increased competition, with the growing Chinese and Russian presence directly challenging US and NATO interests. The Arctic has always been at the core of Russia's identity and security. They control 53% of the Arctic coastline, and the Russian regime's Arctic policy is driven by economic and security needs. The Arctic is fundamental to the Russian economy, accounting for 10% of Russia's GDP and 20% of its exports. Russia has increased its military footprint by reopening old Soviet-era bases, deploying advanced missile systems, and investing in nuclear-powered icebreakers. The Kola Peninsula, home to many of Russia's ballistic missile submarines, highlights the critical role of the Arctic in Russia's nuclear deterrence strategy. Moreover, in seeking to control the Northern Sea route, Russia challenges international norms of freedom of navigation and poses a direct threat to NATO's northern flank and the financial interests of its member states. On the other hand, China's Arctic activities further complicate the security situation. Despite not being an Arctic nation, China has declared itself a near-Arctic state and is seeking influence through its Polar Silk Road initiative. These endeavors often bilaterally support military goals. Sino-Russian joint Arctic exercises, including Coast Guard and maritime patrols, and joint bomber patrols, demonstrate growing military challenges to the United States. By combining Russia's military presence with China's economic and technological capabilities, they create a strategic problem for NATO and the defense of the American homeland. The convergence of Russian and Chinese interests, both in the Arctic and beyond, necessitates the United States to collaborate with its allies to counter threats in the area. Traditionally, the U.S. has had unrivaled military dominance, but in the Arctic, it now faces an emerging alliance between two considerable rivals. American power cannot be assumed. The Sino-Russian partnership aside, U.S. capabilities in the Arctic are not sufficient to counter Russia given all these factors. Successful military operations in the Arctic require specialized training and doctrine for polar warfare, in addition to specialized equipment. Arctic operations are especially complicated by complex logistical requirements, severe weather conditions, and seasonal variations, such as polar days and nights. Therefore, developing Arctic-ready forces requires deliberate training and development of Arctic-based military operations in cold weather settings. Lessons from past Arctic conflicts show the critical need for cold weather training and equipment, specialized polar warfare doctrines, interoperability of joint operations, mobility in Arctic conditions, increased supply and logistical planning, Arctic domain awareness and intelligence, space weather, the disruption of command and control, unique weather, control of Arctic maritime communication routes, and keeping unity of command. Fortunately, NATO already has much of the required infrastructure in the Nordic countries. For instance, the British-led Joint Expeditionary Force was created in 2014, emphasizing Arctic combat capabilities with Nordic military forces in the high north. Recent developments include the creation of a NATO multi-corps land component command in Finland, the establishment of a Nordic Air Force, and a NATO Baltic Command Task Force in the German port city of Rostock. All of these demonstrate an increase in NATO cohesion, capability, and communication, and help to build deterrence around the Arctic Circle. Moreover, the Nordic countries are collaborating to procure an infantry fighting vehicle designed specifically for the subarctic climate. Finland's expertise in Arctic warfare goes back to the Winter War, when thanks to its superior strategies tailored to the Arctic environment, it withstood a much larger Soviet force for longer than anyone expected and ultimately prevailed. Finland's contributions to NATO include significant ground forces and long-range fire. Likewise, Norway is home to NATO's Center of Excellence for cold weather operations. Sweden's membership in NATO strengthens the alliance's air capabilities and industrial base. Denmark's Joint Arctic Command offers vital resources, experience, and capabilities. Canada has long been an important U.S. partner in the Arctic as part of the binational North American Air Defense Command. Denmark is also another NATO's game-changers in the Arctic. Now with the Joint Nordic Air Command, NATO's power in the region will be far more deterrent and multi-layered compared to Russia and China. We have seen several pivotal events play out on the world stage, and it is essential to consider their implications. Thank you for watching, and we encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analysis, and remember to hit the like button. It's a great help to our channel's visibility. After this section, include a brief statement as requested below. Concluding remarks for the end of the video. We have analyzed a lot of details today, and let's recap what we've discovered. The formation of the Joint Nordic Air Command marks a significant shift in NATO's strategic posture. Its role in countering Russian and Chinese ambitions in the Arctic and Baltic regions cannot be overstated. The increased military integration and cooperation among Nordic nations are a critical step toward enhancing regional security. The Arctic's geopolitical and economic importance further emphasizes the need for NATO's strong and coordinated response. The alliance must adapt to the changing global dynamics to maintain a credible defense against emerging threats and to prevent any potential miscalculations.